Hey again, listeners, and welcome to the second episode of Blessed Are the Binary Breakers. This is your host, Avery Smith, and I am super excited about this episode. I met Willow Hovingh a year and a half ago when she co-led a workshop about welcoming trans people into faith communities with me. Willow is a very intelligent, caring person who is just so much fun to be around. She and I recorded this interview a couple weeks ago from my apartment on Louisville Seminary's campus. Let's get into it, listeners. You are in for a treat. I would invite you, Willow, to just, say hello and tell the listeners whatever you think they should know about you.
Okay. I am Willow Hovingh. I'm a trans woman. I'm 56 years old, and it's exciting to be here on this campus because 25 years ago I also was a student here. Mm-hmm. Some other things to know about me. I work as a software developer. I am also the parent of a 22-year-old trans son. And let's start with that.
Yeah, that's plenty to start with. So you only just came out a few years ago as trans. And so...
That's, I decided at the ripe old age of 52 and a half that it was time for me to... At first, I framed it as, I'm going to look into this and see what's involved. Mm-hmm. But then it pretty quickly became clear to me that transitioning and moving into living full time as a woman was what I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
But I'm a late bloomer in terms of coming to that point. I'm also a late bloomer in terms of my involvement with the church. I didn't become a regular churchgoer until I was about 25.
Was that before or after seminary?
Well, so I was in a different program, a different graduate program in Boulder, Colorado, and somehow found my way to a lovely Presbyterian church there. Became quickly very involved and very interested in Bible and theology, and the pastor there kind of encouraged me to look at going to seminary, and a few years later, that's where I ended up. Before
you found that church, what was your childhood like and your family background?
I grew up in the 1960s and 70s in Salt Lake City, and I was pretty much unchurched. When I was 3 or 4 years old, my mom decided that it would be convenient for me to be able to say that I had a church that I went to.
Okay.
And so we spent 2 or 3 years, and I was mostly there in their preschool Christian education program at the Unitarian Church in Salt Lake. But I still would consider myself as having been brought up unchurched.
Okay, yeah.
I'm really not sure. I don't have a good narrative for how I found my way into that Presbyterian church.
Yeah.
In Boulder, part of it was one of my colleagues in graduate school, who we later figured out is a second cousin of mine.
Oh, wow.
He saw something in me that was either searching for something or saw that I would be fertile ground and planted some seeds that really quickly took off.
Would you agree with that, sort of him seeing you searching for something? Were you at that point, do you feel like?
Oh, I think I've been searching for things all my life. At some point in this interview, I want to say that for all of my life, I've really lived with John Scalzi calls it the lowest difficulty settings in the game of life. I was assigned male at birth. I was, when I started to be aware of romantic and sexual orientation, because I was living as male, I appeared straight.
Yeah.
I was white, raised in an overwhelmingly white culture, middle class, educated parents and grandparents. So
all the privileges.
I had all the privileges across the board. There were a lot of ways in which I was different from the other people around me.
Yeah.
For my first 6 years, I was raised by a single mother. If you think that being a single mother in Utah in the early 60s was easy, you'd be wrong. And she just did wonderfully under challenging circumstances. But I think it's safe to say that I never, ever, ever saw myself as one of the boys.
Okay.
I was not like any of the other boys, and frankly, I really didn't enjoy their company. I wasn't like them, and I didn't want to be like them.
Yeah.
In contrast with a lot of personal narratives that I hear from trans women roughly my age, I wasn't intensely aware as a child of being trans. I just knew I was different, and all through elementary and middle school. I was just the weird kid.
Yeah. Oh, I relate to that.
There were a few people who tossed the word queer at me, but mostly it was sort of a generic, you're different from us. Your listeners can't see because it's not a visual medium, is my curly hair.
Yeah.
That's mostly what I got teased about.
Really?
Yeah.
Just your curls?
Like in the 6th grade, there was one kid who just mercilessly teased me, calling me Curly Lou, Curly Lou.
Oh my gosh. What an insult. And I was going to tell you I love your curls.
Well, and I do too.
Yeah.
Now let's go ahead and fast forward.
Yeah, move forward.
So I graduated high school. I did undergraduate work in Southern California.
Oh, wow.
I went on to graduate school and ended up in Boulder, a really wonderful program. But as I moved into adulthood, one of the things that I started to notice that really kind of puzzled me was I really, really did not want to work with a therapist who wasn't a woman, or have work with a physician who wasn't a woman, to the extent that being a student in a scientific field allowed it. My preference was to hang socially with women. I mean, I did have in my undergraduate and graduate years some really dear friends who are male, but I would have been just as happy if...
Yeah, just had all female friends. Yeah.
Yeah. Starting in childhood and then, developing into adulthood, there would be these little things that I would notice that were like, oh, okay, that's another way in which I'm not...
Yeah, not typical.
Yeah. So I was in this PhD program in Colorado, and I was pretty uncomfortable and unhappy with my life, and maybe that's what my friend, who turned out to be a second cousin, saw. As soon as I got involved with that church in Boulder, I just really dug deep into scripture and theology and the history of the church, and I was just fascinated by it. And so I actually ended up deciding that I'd go ahead and finish that degree, but then I applied to come to Louisville Presbyterian Seminary. I think initially my thought was that I could go into pastoring or maybe academia. As it turned out, that's not how things worked out. But it did bring me here, and I also learned about myself that changing geography and changing academic fields did not relieve me of that sense of not being comfortable with my life.
Yeah.
So a couple of things happened when I got to Louisville.
Yeah. And what, just to give a time frame, was that, what decade was that sort of?
Yeah, so I arrived in Louisville in August of 1992.
Okay. 2 years before I was born.
Right, right. So a couple of things happened when I got here. One was that I developed a really, really strong and pretty intense friendship with one of the other students who started at the same time. I still value having had that friendship.
Yeah.
But one of the things that she used to jokingly say was and she was assigned female at birth, and in some ways, but not always, gender atypical.
Okay.
And the way that the phrase that she had to describe that was, I missed out on that course in girl indoctrination school.
Oh my gosh. That's relatable.
And what I started to realize was I had missed out on just about all of boy indoctrination school. And then I realized that I was pretty glad.
Yeah. You didn't miss out on too much.
Yeah. So this list of things about my life that puzzled me kind of started to stack up.
Yeah.
And at some point after I'd been here for about 2 years, so we're now in 1994, was the very, very first time that the possibility occurred to me, I might be a trans woman. Now, contrary to current transgender vocabulary orthodoxy, that really was tied up in what I was noticing about who I was romantically and physically attracted to.
Okay.
To be blunt, all the people I found myself attracted to were masculine of center lesbians.
Aha.
And it's
okay.
like, what the
Yeah.
hell?
Yeah. And so if you're supposed to be a man and you're attracted to lesbians,
Yeah.
I can imagine that was very confusing.
It was awfully confusing.
Yeah.
And so I confided in this friend, I think I'm looking at the possibility that I might be a lesbian who was assigned male at birth. And actually, I think I used that horrible phrase, trapped in the body of a man, which is a phrase I don't like. It turned out that she had come here from a women's studies program that was at the time and still is notoriously trans exclusionary. That was pretty much the end of our friendship.
Yeah. She was not happy with that.
Well, she was not happy with that, and her message to me was, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as that. And I will tell you, I still feel that loss.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was also in therapy at the time, and I brought it up with the therapist I was seeing, and he didn't shut it down in terms of, no, that can't possibly be true. His message was not, no, that's an impossible identity. His message was, you've got enough going on in your life, and that is an awful hard road to try to walk down.
Okay.
And I don't think he was wrong.
Okay.
I mean, I think that if I had tried pursuing transition at that time, it would have been really difficult, and I certainly would be in a very, very different place today.
Yeah,
I don't
sure.
I don't think that I would have had the kind of support that I have had in the past 4.5 years. And so I really kind of put it on the shelf.
Yeah.
And then a whole bunch of stuff happened in my life. I did get married, and we had a child. That marriage ended pretty quickly, pretty shortly after.
Okay.
Something else that was going on was I had come into the seminary program already really pretty burned out on on academics.
Yeah.
And so, I stuck around for several years and left after 6 years with the 2-year degree instead of the 3-year degree that I'd come for. But the whole idea of maybe being a trans woman, first of all, I'd only gotten to the point where I considered it as sort of a theoretical possibility.
Okay.
And second of all, I was now a single parent.
Yeah.
And raising a kid and in the real world of work for the first time in my life. And I really kind of put it on the shelf. Mm-hmm. And it stayed on the shelf for about 20 years.
It's a long time.
Well, I think that I differ from a lot of the trans folks I know in that I was never really clearly, consciously aware of dysphoria, of being intensely and clearly uncomfortable with parts of my body or with aspects of how I lived. I was just uncomfortable with everything. Somebody who I met a couple of years later, who is still a very good friend, came up with the perfect metaphor. She said, when I first met you, it was like meeting somebody who spent every day walking around in a sandpaper suit. Just everything about life was uncomfortable. And she said that to me a couple of years ago after I had started transitioning, and her point was that I no longer was like that.
Wow.
So much changed for me. Starting just with the decision, I'm going to do this. But then as I started to make small changes in what I was wearing, and God bless estrogen from my perspective.
Yeah.
Being able to start on androgen suppressors and start introducing estrogen into my system made a world of difference for my outlook. And so there's a trans writer named Sam Dillon Finch who I think had a somewhat similar experience and talks about gender euphoria rather than dysphoria.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not so much that I got rid of specific things that I was uncomfortable with, but started discovering things that I hadn't known were possible that were just so delightful.
And I think it's so important to get that narrative out there, that being trans isn't only about like suffering and hating yourself and stuff. It's also about finding, joy.
And again, largely thanks to all of the privileges that I walked into life with, that road has been pretty easy for me. One of the things that happened towards the end of my time at the seminary was that I got connected up with a tiny Lutheran church here in town, an ELCA congregation. It's unlike any other congregation I've been exposed to.
Are they still around?
Well, so
do you want to give them a shout out?
I do. Third Lutheran Church.
Okay, I'll have to visit them.
Oh God, we would welcome you.
Yeah.
And actually, they invited me to come teach their adult Sunday school class.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Awesome.
And I still teach that Sunday school class every Sunday.
Wow. Wow. Oh, I have to come and see that.
And what I didn't know about them was not more than 2 years earlier, before I walked through the door, that congregation had made the decision to sign on with what in the ELCA is designated reconciling in Christ.
Okay.
Roughly equivalent to more light
Yeah.
Presbyterians. That, in part, was what was responsible for their sort of difficult pastoral situation, because the bishop at the time was strongly anti-gay.
Yeah. Not a fan of.
Not a fan, and once the congregation had made that decision, well, first of all, there were some members who left.
Sure.
But mostly there was a complete withdrawal of support, especially in terms of calling a new pastor from the synod. And, you know, frankly, the impression that I have was that bishop expected that the congregation would close its doors within a couple of years. And
just kind of fall apart.
And there was, you know, what I will say is that congregation has been 2 years from closing its doors for 25 years.
Wow.
So
they're hanging in there.
we've had some really wonderful pastoral leadership. The ELCA decided as late as 2009 that it would be okay for partnered gay people to be rostered clergy.
Okay. Yeah.
And one of our members, who's been clear about his call to ministry since he was 7 years old,
Wow.
was finally able to be ordained.
Oh, good.
And he's our current serving pastor.
Oh, cool.
So we're pastored by a married gay man.
Mm-hmm.
We have 2 members who are ELCA seminarians,
Okay.
both of whom are gay men.
Oh, wow.
We have LG and B people in congregational leadership, and the adult Sunday school is taught by a T person.
Yeah. That's great.
And it's really, really a wonderfully affirming place.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I would have been as comfortable transitioning had I not been involved and, you know, long-term involved with a congregation that, you know, there was never any doubt in my mind that my transition was going to be recognized and accepted and welcomed.
Wow. That's beautiful. I'm so glad you had that.
Well, I'm deeply, deeply grateful. And our pastor was one of the first people I came out to. It was the first place that I went, you know, out in public in a skirt. And, you know, there were a few kind of raised eyebrows, but they were just wondering what was going on, because I hadn't made a big announcement.
Yeah. So not judgmental, just kind of
Absolutely
curious.
not judgmental, just curious. And, you know, one of the high points of the past couple of years was when we did a recognition of name change rite in the congregation on a Baptism of Christ Sunday 2 years ago.
That's awesome.
That's always going to be a treasured memory of mine.
Yeah. What about that was so special for you?
Part of it was just knowing that a faith community that has been an important part of my life and my child's life for 2 decades was a place where I was fully affirmed and welcomed and celebrated. Yeah. And, you know, it was constructed as an affirmation of baptism.
Yeah.
But one of my dear friends from the congregation stood up with me, along with my son. They weren't baptismal sponsors, but they kind of played that same role. And when my friend Kristen, as part of that liturgy, said something about recognizing Willow as the strong, beautiful woman she is, you know, I'm getting a little weepy just thinking about it. So I've been very, very blessed to have that community of faith where I'm affirmed.
Yeah, I'm so happy you have that.
Yeah.
And I wish every trans person had that.
Yeah. And unlike a lot of trans people, I never had any exposure to a community of faith where I wouldn't have been affirmed. You know, the Presbyterian congregation in Colorado that I initially became involved in, I don't think had an official position on ordination of gay people. The man who was the pastor there who baptized me and later encouraged me to go to seminary, he, you know, that debate within the PCUSA was just really kind of heating up. He had a beautiful way of expressing it. There's a lot of things in understanding Scripture, he said, that I'm not 100% sure about. And I am the first to admit that I might well be wrong.
Yeah.
But if there's something that I might be wrong about, I would like to err on the side of grace.
That is beautiful.
It's beautiful, and you know, it's been an important thing to hold on to, not only in the context of queer people being accepted within the church, but of all of the controversies that church people get into.
All the little theological debates that we like to have.
You know, it's a very useful hermeneutic.
Yes.
Okay, if I'm going to make a mistake, let me make it on the side of grace.
On the side of grace, yeah.
Another thing that has been a real gift to me, a phrase that I've held on to, was actually something that when I first came to the seminary here on an exploratory weekend, I was just looking into it. Gene March, who was the dean at the time, talked to the group of us about how do you understand your vocation, and how does that fit into how the church, both institutionally and metaphysically, handles vocation. And he said, one thing to ask yourself is, what are the things that I can't not do? The things that I would be doing even if nobody paid me to do them, even if people told me that I shouldn't be doing them. And of course, you know, what are the life-enriching things that you can't not do? And some words in there about, you know, if a whole lot of people in your community of faith and in your life are telling you not to do something, at least listen.
Yeah, reflect on it. Yeah.
Yeah. But when it got to the point that I had, and this is what, 5 years ago? Yeah, 2014. When I got to the point, it is time for me to pick back up off the shelf the idea that I might be a trans person, and to start asking what would be involved in walking down that road. I started to ask, is this something that I can't not do?
Yeah.
And 20 years before that, it hadn't been a can't not do thing. And something else that had happened maybe a couple of years earlier, I'd been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, and that meant some lifestyle changes for me. And also, maybe it was just as simple as turning 50. But I woke up one morning and said, you know, I'm old enough that I just really don't give a hoot what anybody thinks of how I look or how I dress, or, you know, I am done worrying about other people's impressions of me. And so a couple of years later, it became very easy to say, well, I'm already not worrying about other people's superficial impressions of me. So what is going to make my life comfortable for once? And that ended up being the road that I went down. And, you know, in retrospect, that therapist who told me in 1994 or whenever it was that going down the road of transition would be hard.
Yeah.
He was absolutely right.
Sure.
Because a whole lot of water passed under the metaphorical bridge between 1994 and 2014.
Yeah.
And a whole lot of awareness of trans people and acceptance, more acceptance developed in that time. And so, I mean, it really was relatively painless. You know, I was able to find the medical assistance that I needed. You know, I have, with a couple of just small irritations,
Sure.
aside from those, I have had no adverse healthcare experiences.
That's really, really cool. That's great.
Well, it's really cool. I also recognize that it's highly unusual.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, everything has been so easy. I worried about coming out in my workplace. It's one county south in a relatively conservative area. And I spent a couple of years really anguishing because I would kind of listen to side conversations between people who were in adjoining cubicles. And, you know, when Indiana passed its religious freedom law, and there was backlash, there were a couple of people in adjoining cubicles who were pretty outraged at the backlash.
Of course.
And my department head, who's now my boss, I knew was a fairly conservative Catholic person.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was really, really concerned.
Yeah.
And I had absolutely no reason to be. That workplace handled my transition really, really well. Now, I did some work to help set that up.
Educate them and
to educate them. But they took the information that I helped them find and really ran with it. And I haven't had anybody give me any kind of side eye at that workplace.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of the big reasons why workplaces and schools and families need to sort of do the work and, like, make their stance clear before someone comes out. Because, like, it's a little different, but with my family, they're more, like, my parents are conservative and Catholic. And so, like, I had no clue how they were going to handle me coming out as queer because we just never talked about it. I didn't know if they felt negatively or, you know, there was just no knowledge. So, like, families and workplaces, they should somehow make the message clear that if someone is going to come out, that it'll be received well. Because then you wouldn't have had to spend those years anguishing.
And I'll tell you, I would have been more productive for those years, too.
Yeah. If you didn't have to have that worry hanging over you.
Yeah. I've often joked that if I ever wrote an autobiography, the title would be "If You Had Told Me Then." You know, if you had told me when I was 12 or 14 years old that I'd be a happy woman, I would have just shaken my head because A, I didn't have the vocabulary, and B, you know, all throughout my adolescent years, I think I would have had a hard time believing that I was ever going to be happy.
Wow.
And that's for a variety of reasons, but I really think that part of it was deeply, deeply, deeply buried understanding that I wasn't living my truth.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't know what that truth was yet.
Do you feel like you're living your truth now?
Yeah. I am. I am. I think that I also think that I have some more of that truth to discover.
Oh, for sure. Hopefully we all do.
Yeah. You know, one thing that I've noticed was fairly early on, after having decided to pursue transition, I kind of had some preconceptions about sort of what my transition goals were going to be, and like I had some pretty clear ideas about what my clothing style was going to be.
Okay.
And those have turned out to be wrong. Initially, I didn't really picture myself wearing skirts and dresses, but boy, the day I put on my first skirt, and especially the day that I wore that skirt to church, it was so clear to me that that's what I was supposed to be wearing.
Oh, that's awesome. That sort of unexpected rightness to
Yeah, and again, it's that euphoria that
you could have lived without it, but you would have missed out on that feeling of rightness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And like God doesn't intend us to just kind of live without things that are joyful, like to just sort of have that neutral life. We're called to a full life.
Yeah, that reminds me of something that Justin Tanis talks about.
Yeah.
Which
Love that guy.
Yeah.
Just finished reading this
all
the way through.
Wonderful. Is that available now?
Yes. Oh, just side note for listeners: Transgender, a book by Justin Tanis from like 2003, I think, used to be like $130 to buy because it was out of print. It's now like $23, so it's back in print, y'all.
Yeah.
Justin Tanis.
Yeah. Talks about that being and living as a trans person and living into that truth is just as much a calling,
Yes.
a vocation from God,
Yes.
as is a ministerial vocation.
Yeah. And yeah, I believe that 100%.
And many of those, and that ties back in with the, what can't you not do? Well, I having now lived as myself for the first time in 50 odd years, I can't go back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
After you've seen what euphoria is like, after you've seen what full life is like,
Yeah.
it would be cruel of anyone to try and push you back into something
Yeah.
else.
And I'm truly blessed that I don't have anybody in my life
Telling you that.
who would tell me
Good.
that. That early on in transition, the other source of stress for me was going to be, how will my parents deal with it, and how is my kid going to deal with it? At the time, my son was 17, 18, and my parents actually lived with us.
Oh, okay.
During his school years. So it was the four of us in the house together. And I first talked to my kid, and nobody has been a bigger booster all the way along. But he was really, really, really concerned about how they would deal with it.
Yeah.
I think that both of us had a misimpression of how conservative they were.
Yeah.
I gotta say, my relationship with them has blossomed and become infinitely richer. I think that they might not articulate it this way,
Sure.
but I think they can see my life is better and more authentic in all those words.
Yeah.
But he made me promise not to have that talk with them while he was in the house.
Okay.
And I had that conversation with them and went and picked him up from the youth group activity that he was involved in, and he said, "Are they still there?" Because his fear was that they would pack their bags and leave.
Yeah.
Which was completely unfounded, but they struggled a little bit, but only because they didn't yet have the information, not because they were hostile. And the real switching point, especially for my mom, was the day that I first went to work as Willow and came home and was able to report to her that had gone well.
Yeah.
It was like it threw a switch for her.
Wow.
And the very next night she called me up and said, "On the Christmas cards that we send out this year to family, can I use your new name?"
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sweet.
Yeah. And the extended family has by and large been supportive too, which, I mean, I don't know why all of this surprised me, but it did.
Well, it's unfortunate, but there are so many stories where things go horribly wrong. I mean, that was my expectation with my family, too, that I would deal with a lot more hostility than I have. And it goes back again to, like, you know, people who would potentially be supportive should sort of broadcast that before the issue arises.
Yeah.
So that those of us who are thinking of coming out don't have to be afraid to do so.
Yeah.
Because, your brain will just... Your imagination goes wild when you're thinking of coming out. You know all the stories of it going wrong and the rejection. And that's all you can think about. Even, like, I like to think of myself as an optimist, but when it came to coming out, I was thinking worst case scenarios for everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I have never been more happy to be proven wrong.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. For a while, I've been kind of working in the back of my mind on a Facebook post that I think I really want to put out there. That I would want to address to all of the people I was in seminary with, all the people I know who are working pastors. And it goes something like this. Someday soon, somebody's going to walk into your office, and it might be a member of your congregation who says, I think I'm trans. Or it might be a member of your congregation who says, my son keeps insisting that he's not a boy. Or my daughter keeps insisting that she's not a boy or a girl.
Yeah.
Or somebody's going to walk through your front doors who you clock as being visibly transgender, who's a stranger to the congregation. Are you ready?
Yeah.
You know, what resources do you have at your fingertips to be able to answer their questions? And what are you and your congregation doing today to make that person feel welcome and to make it clear to people who haven't walked through the door yet that they too will be welcome?
You should definitely make that post. Yeah.
And you know, I'm not a huge out on the front lines activist, but you know, there was this election thing a little over 2 years ago.
Yep. There was that, sadly.
And frankly, it was that really kicked me into gear in terms of going ahead and getting my name changed and coming out at work. Because I was thinking, okay, what am I going to do to resist this? Well, one thing that I knew I could do would be to just show up at that workplace visibly trans.
Yeah, just living your life
is
an act of resistance.
You know, none of the people I work with now can ever say, well, I've never met a trans person.
Yeah, that it doesn't affect their life or people they know.
Yeah, and you know, I hope that they can see that, yes, I'm trans, and I am also a productive member of society, and not some strange mythical creature.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing we haven't talked about is what it's like being a trans person who is the parent of a trans person.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because you came out to your son. How long after that was it that he came out to you?
It was a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months, but no more than a couple of months after I had that conversation with my parents. And, you know, maybe part of it was that he saw that, no, they didn't pack their bags and go home. That's when he came out to us. And, you know, I'll be honest, they've been a lot better about, my parents have been a lot better about name and pronouns with me than they are with him.
Oh.
The other thing that is true about both my parents is they're in their early 80s. You know, so they're certainly, they don't hit 100% even on my name or pronouns. I'm not really all that bothered by that.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm just happy they're trying.
Yeah, you know that they're accepting, you know they're trying.
Yeah.
And so the mistakes aren't as painful.
In the same way that, my coworkers will occasionally slip, because they knew me for 6 or 7 years as this person with that name and that beard and those pronouns. And, verbal habit is a strong thing. And pardon my blue language for a minute, but I have always said the only thing that's ever going to bother me is deliberate assholery. With the exception of one cousin, I have not encountered that, and he's always been
An asshole.
An asshole. So
no shockers. No surprise there.
so no, it didn't come as a surprise. I keep saying it, but it's true. I've been incredibly lucky and incredibly blessed all the way along.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but sometimes when I feel like I've been lucky, I feel bad about that. And I always try to remind myself, it's a good thing that I've encountered this acceptance. The goal isn't to, play some sort of oppression Olympics where I should want to be, rejected and stuff. The goal is to bring all trans people up to that level of acceptance.
Exactly.
Everyone's... And
it motivates me to do things like to reach out to the working pastors I know to say, this has been so wonderful for me. I really would like you to be equipped to be able to extend the same welcome.
So it can be wonderful for others too.
Yeah, it's kind of a motivator. And we were talking earlier about what's my personal relationship with the divine.
Yeah.
I guess I would say it's primarily gratitude based. I recognize from the get-go that all good things come from God.
Yeah.
I also recognize just from experience that my life goes a whole lot smoother the more I can recognize and focus on those good things and my gratitude for them. So my son, getting back to him, he has always, as soon as I was out to my parents, he has consistently referred to me and introduced me as Mom. And I know different people in different families have different ways of negotiating around that.
Yeah.
The fact that my ex and I live apart makes it a little bit easier because no matter which house he's in, when he says, "Hey, Mom," there's only one person who's going to answer.
Yeah.
On the other hand, he also has the disadvantage of getting caught into endless "go ask your mother" loops. And I hope I've been reasonably good about talking about him as my son and getting the pronouns right and getting the name right.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest. Any parent, I think, would have some concerns about, well, what is my kid's life going to be like?
Yeah.
I'll be there if he needs me.
I think that's my mom's main hang-up a lot of times with me being non-binary is just, but what will people think? Will it affect your ability to get jobs and things like that? Especially being, I guess if I stayed on testosterone long enough and, wore the right clothes and did the right things, I could pass as a man, but I have no desire to do that. It might give me a leg up in certain kinds of careers, but I do not want to do that. And I think that's part of her concern is because I want to be visibly queer, that worry that, well, what if someone harasses you for it or doesn't give you a job for it? And so, I think you have such a unique viewpoint being trans yourself and also having a trans child to kind of have those thoughts about.
Well, and I'm not a typical anything, I don't think. And maybe that goes all the way back to, third grade being kind of proud of being the weird kid.
Yeah.
But I'm sure pretty happy with where I am right now. And I'm really, really grateful to have gotten rid of that sandpaper suit.
Yeah, for sure. No one should live like that. So.
Nobody should have to live like that. And certainly nobody should have to live surrounded by people who want that for them.
Yes. Here's to a future where everyone can be free of those sandpaper suits and
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
live their true selves and experience euphoria and freedom.
And live lives that can be full of gratitude.
Ready to wrap up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you for the invitation to
Absolutely. I want to thank you
to
for
talk.
accepting the invitation. Like you said, you're not a typical anything. The kind of goal of this podcast is to get as big a variety of stories as we can. And I thought yours would be a great starting point. So.
Yeah. Well, and, going back to that Facebook post that I want to write, I think that something that is so important for cis straight people to know, I call them muggles.
The muggles.
What I would really love for all the muggles to know is that no two trans people have exactly the same pathway.
The muggles. I love that. I'm going to start using that. Someone yelled at me on Facebook a while ago for saying cisheads, so I'm going to change to muggles.
Yeah. Well, and I like it because what does that make us but wizards?
Yes. Magical. I think the way I ended the other one was like, go out there and break some binaries or something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And be a blessing to the world with your life.